"You're everything I need, Lee," she'd said, and for one unbearable second she watched something in his face open. Lee Dong doesn't move after that. That's what she'll remember most, even now. The low light over the table, the wine neither of them has touched, and a man who has just been handed the worst sentence of his life who still doesn't flinch, doesn't reach for the glass in front of him, doesn't do any of the things she braced herself for. He just sits there, across from her, absorbing it the way he absorbs everything, like stillness is the only language he trusts. Then she finished the sentence. "But you're not the man my heart wants." The silence that follows is the loudest thing she's ever heard. 3 months ago, she didn't need his forgiveness. She didn't need his mercy either. What she'd demanded, the first time anyone in the city dared bring her his name, was simpler and far more dangerous. She'd demanded to meet him. She didn't know yet that walking into his world unafraid was the one thing that would make him fall in love with her, and the one thing that could never make her fall in love with him. If you've ever told someone the truth, even though it broke them, stay with this one. The letter arrives on a Tuesday, tucked between a client invoice and a stack of unopened mail Naledi hasn't had the energy to face. It doesn't look dangerous. That's what makes it worse. Plain paper, plain numbers, a debt against her studio's lease she has never seen before, attached to a building she thought she owned free and clear. She reads it twice before the anger catches up to the confusion. The figure is wrong. Not wrong in the way numbers are sometimes wrong, a decimal in the wrong place, an honest error waiting to be corrected with a phone call. Wrong in the way that only makes sense if someone built it to be wrong on purpose, padded past anything she could have actually owed, betting she'd be too frightened by the size of it to look closely. She looks closely. She spends the night with old contracts spread across her kitchen table, cross-referencing every payment she's ever made against a building she inherited free of debt 3 years ago. By morning, she has a list of discrepancies long enough to make her hands shake. Not from fear this time, but from the particular fury of being underestimated. Everyone she calls gives her the same answer, wrapped in different apologies. The property office won't say who holds the debt. Her lawyer tells her carefully that pursuing it through the courts could take years she doesn't have. A contact from another studio owner, when she finally admits what's happening, goes quiet on the phone and then says, very carefully, that this kind of debt usually traces back to people you don't want finding your name. "Then I'll find theirs first," Naledi says. It takes her 4 days and one very uncomfortable conversation with a man who clearly regrets ever mentioning it, but she finally gets a name, whispered like it might summon something. Lee Dong. She writes it down without flinching, the way she's written down every other name on every other invoice, like he's just another line item she intends to reconcile. She doesn't ask a friend to make the introduction. She doesn't wait for an invitation. She finds the number for the office everyone insists doesn't officially exist and leaves a message stating plainly that she is not interested in paying an inflated debt without an explanation from the man responsible for it, and that she would like to discuss it directly with him. She hangs up expecting silence, expecting at best someone lower down the chain to call her back with a runaround. Instead, less than an hour later, her phone rings with a number she doesn't recognize. "You wanted to meet me," a voice says, calm, unhurried, faintly amused in a way she can't quite place. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Come alone." The building doesn't look like anything from the outside. No name, no sign, just glass and steel that could belong to any company with money to spend on being forgettable. That's the point, she realizes, as she steps into the lobby at exactly 10 o'clock. Men who need to be seen put their names on the door. Men like this one don't. A woman at the front desk doesn't ask her name. She already knows it. Li Dong's office is on the top floor, and the elevator ride up is long enough for Naledi to notice her own pulse without quite admitting to herself that it's fear. She'd told herself, driving over, that she wasn't afraid of him. She still isn't, not exactly, but there's a difference between not being afraid and not feeling the weight of what he represents, and she feels that weight settle over her the moment the doors open. He's standing by the window when she walks in, and he doesn't turn around right away, which she suspects is deliberate, a small performance of unconcern for a woman who demanded an audience most people spend years trying to avoid. "You're punctual," he says, finally, turning. "That's rare. I don't like waiting on explanations I'm owed." Something flickers across his face, not quite a smile, but close enough that she catalogues it. He gestures to the chair across from his desk. She doesn't sit. "The debt against my studio is inflated, not by a little, by enough that whoever built it assumed I wouldn't check." "You checked." "I checked." He studies her for a long moment, and she has the distinct sense of being recalculated. Whatever assumption he'd walked in with about how this meeting would go, she's already broken it. "You're right," he says, simply. "It shouldn't have reached the number it did. I'll waive it. All of it." It isn't the answer she expected, and it isn't the one she wants. "I didn't come here for charity." "It isn't charity, it's a correction." "Call it whatever makes it easier for you," she says. "I'll pay what I actually owe, not the inflated number, the real one, once someone tells me what that is. On my terms, my schedule." For the first time since she walked in, he looks genuinely caught off guard, and she watches him decide, visibly, not to argue with her about it. "No one refuses a debt cancellation," he says, almost to himself. "I'm not no one." "No," he says, quiet now, something unreadable settling behind his eyes. "You're clearly not." It takes Li Dong 11 days to find the answer, though he could have found it in 3 if he hadn't made himself sit with the question first, why an inflated number would have appeared on a civilian's account in the first place, and who along the chain had decided she was safe to overcharge. The answer, when it comes, is Choi. He's not surprised, exactly. Choi has always run his corner of the operation with a looseness Li Dong has tolerated because loyalty in this world is worth more than precision. But loyalty was never supposed to include padding numbers against people with no way to push back. Naledi pushed back. That's the part Choi hadn't accounted for, and the part that makes Li Dong's jaw tighten when he reads the report a second time. He calls Choi into the office alone, no witnesses, which is its own kind of message. "Explain the studio," Li Dong says, sliding the file across the desk without preamble. Choi doesn't bother pretending confusion. A small cushion, standard practice on accounts that don't have anyone watching them closely. She watched closely. She's one woman with a lease. She's one woman who called this office and asked to meet the man responsible, Li Dong says, and lets the silence do the rest of the work. You didn't think that mattered. It doesn't. Not really. It's noise. It's noise I had to clean up personally. Li Dong closes the file, which means it cost me more than whatever cushion you were counting on. Choi's expression shifts, something calculating settling behind the practiced apology he offers next. Not remorse, Li Dong notes, but recalibration, a man deciding how to file this away rather than a man deciding not to do it again. It won't happen again, Choi says. No, Li Dong agrees, it won't. Not on her account and not on anyone else you've been managing the same way. I'll be reviewing all of them. He doesn't raise his voice through any of it, doesn't need to. Choi leaves the office considerably paler than he entered it, and word will move through the ranks by morning the way it always does, without Li Dong having to say another word to anyone. What he doesn't say to Choi, what he barely lets himself acknowledge in the quiet after the door closes, is the other thing sitting underneath the discipline, that he spent 11 days thinking about a woman who refused to be rescued, who walked into his office without an ounce of the fear everyone else brings through that door, and that some small, unfamiliar part of him is already looking for a reason to see her again. He tells himself it's about the debt. He knows, even as he thinks it, that it isn't only that. The first payment is small, and deliberately so, a fraction of what she actually owes, delivered in person because she doesn't trust wiring money into an account with no name attached to it. She shows up at his office unannounced, an envelope in hand, and tells the front desk she doesn't need an appointment, only 5 minutes. She gets 5 minutes, then 10. "You didn't have to come yourself," Li Dong says, taking the envelope like it's an ordinary transaction and not the first of what she's promised will be many. "I could have sent someone to collect it." "I don't hand money to people I've never met." She watches him set it aside without counting it, which annoys her more than it should. "Aren't you going to check it?" "I trust the number." "You don't know me well enough to trust anything about me." "I know you drove across the city to hand-deliver an amount most people wouldn't bother mentioning," he says. "That tells me more than the number would." She doesn't have a ready answer for that, which unsettles her almost as much as the observation itself. She leaves without quite meaning to stay as long as she did, and it isn't until she's back in her car that she realizes she never once felt the fear everyone warned her she should. The second payment, 3 weeks later, turns into a conversation about the studio's renovation plans because he actually asks, waits for the answer instead of filling silence with something else. The third payment turns into 15 minutes standing at his window, looking out over a city he seems to know the way other people know the inside of their own homes, pointing out a building he says he watched being built from the ground up. She starts noticing things she didn't expect to notice, that he remembers, without her repeating it, that she takes her coffee black, that he asks about the studio's clients by name after she's only mentioned them once, that he never once brings up the debt himself. She's the one who insists on it every time, like she's the only person in the room still keeping score. "You don't have to keep reminding me you're paying it back," he tells her once, amused in that quiet way of his. "I haven't forgotten. I'm reminding myself, not you." He doesn't push on that, though he can tell he's turning it over, the difference between a woman making sure a debt gets paid and a woman making sure she doesn't start owing him something she can't put a number on. She isn't sure, driving home that night, which one she actually is anymore. She calls him for the first time without an envelope in hand, on a night she doesn't fully understand herself. It's past 11 and the studio's biggest client has just pulled out of a contract she spent 4 months building, and she's sitting alone in the office with the lights off because turning them on feels like admitting the day actually happened. She doesn't call a friend. She doesn't call her mother, who would only worry. She scrolls to his name before she's decided to, and it's ringing before she can talk herself out of it. Naledi? Not a question, not surprise, just her name, like he's been waiting to hear it at an hour like this. "I didn't have anyone else to call," she says, and immediately regrets how much that admits. "You called the right person then." No pity in his voice, which is the only reason she doesn't hang up. She tells him about the contract, the 4 months, the client who wouldn't say why he was pulling out, only that he'd found someone else. Li Dong listens in a way she isn't used to being listened to, not waiting for his turn to fix it, just absorbing it, letting her finish. "Do you want me to find out why?" he asks when she's done. "No." She's surprised by how quickly the answer comes. "I want to be angry about it without you handling it for me." "That's fair." A pause. "Are you angry or are you tired?" The question catches her off guard, mostly because he's right. Underneath the anger is something closer to exhaustion, the particular kind that comes from building something alone for years and watching it wobble the moment she isn't looking. She doesn't say any of that out loud. She doesn't have to. He waits, unbothered by the silence, the way he seems unbothered by most things. Both, she finally says. Then be both, he says. You don't have to pick one for my benefit. She laughs, short and surprised, the first real laugh she's had all day. That's oddly generous advice from a man who runs half this city on fear. I don't run anything on fear with you. The line goes quiet after that. Not uncomfortable, just full, the kind of silence two people share when neither wants to be the one to end the call first. She stays on the line longer than she means to, talking about nothing important, the renovation, a book she hasn't finished, until she notices it's past midnight and she's smiling at her dark office like it isn't dark at all. When she finally hangs up, she sits there a moment longer, unsettled by how easy it was, how much easier, if she's honest, than it should have been. The man is waiting outside her studio when she locks up, leaning against the wall with the kind of patience that isn't really patience at all, the kind that's just waiting for permission to stop pretending. Choi, he says, like she should recognize the name. She doesn't, not until he adds, almost pleasantly, I used to manage your account before your friend decided to make a project out of me. Naledi's hand tightens on her keys. She doesn't step back. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. He pushes off the wall, unhurried, and she notices how carefully he keeps the distance between them just short of threatening, close enough to unsettle, not close enough to give her an excuse to scream. You made a phone call, asked to meet the man in charge. Very brave. Cost me a great deal more than the debt was worth. That sounds like a you problem. Something shifts in his face, amusement thinning into something colder. It became a you problem the moment you made it personal. I'd think about that if I were you, about who's actually protecting you and how long that's likely to last once he gets bored. She keeps her voice steady even though her pulse isn't. Is that a threat? It's a suggestion, he smiles, and it doesn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Enjoy the attention while it lasts. He's gone before she can decide whether to call anyone, disappearing around the corner like a man who's done exactly what he came to do and doesn't need to overstay it. She stands there a long moment, keys still in her fist, telling herself it isn't fear, it's adrenaline, there's a difference, and not quite believing it. She calls Lee Dong from her car, and for the first time since she's known him, her voice isn't as steady as she wants it to be. He's at the studio in 11 minutes. She knows because she watches the clock the entire time, watches it the way she's never let herself watch anything waiting for him. He doesn't ask her to repeat the story more than once. He doesn't raise his voice in front of her, doesn't perform anger the way she half expected him to. He just goes very still, the way he did in his office the day they met, and says quietly, he won't come near you again. How do you know that? Because I'm telling you, he says, and there's nothing cruel in it, nothing like the man who just left her shaking outside her own studio, just certainty, absolute and unbothered. You don't have to be afraid of any of this. You were never supposed to have to be afraid of any of this. For the first time, she believes every word of it. Choi doesn't come back. She hears, secondhand, weeks later, that he's no longer working anywhere near the ports, and she doesn't ask what that means, and Lee Dong doesn't offer to tell her. That's one of the things she's learned about him. He protects her from the parts of his world that would frighten her, not by lying about them, by simply not making her carry them. It should feel like relief, the threat closing. Instead, something else opens in its place. She notices at first in small ways, that she's started reaching for her phone to tell him things before she's finished thinking them. A client win, a stupid joke, the particular color the sky turned over the harbor on her drive home. That she's disappointed on the nights he's busy, in a way that has nothing to do with the debt she's still stubbornly paying off in pieces he no longer seems to track. They're sitting on his balcony one night, the city spread out below them in a way that makes the whole dangerous world he runs look almost peaceful from this height, when he tells her about his mother, the first time he's offered anything from before he became the man everyone in this city lowers their voice around. He tells it plainly, without asking for sympathy, and she finds herself reaching over without deciding to and covering his hand with hers. He goes very still under her palm, not withdrawing, just still, the way he gets when something matters more than he's letting on. Neither of them moves for a long moment. "Naledi," he says, low, and something in the way he says her name makes her chest tighten before he said anything else. She pulls her hand back before he can finish, not because she doesn't want it there, but because some instinct she can't quite name tells her this is a door she isn't ready to open, not yet, maybe not ever, and definitely not tonight, on a balcony, with the whole city watching them not talk about it. "It's late," she says, standing too quickly. "Naledi," just her name again, patient, not pushing. "I should go." She's already gathering her things, and he lets her, doesn't reach for her, doesn't ask her to explain herself, which somehow makes it worse, the not asking, the way he seems to already understand something about this moment that she's still refusing to look at directly. She drives home with the windows down, telling herself it's nothing, that she imagined the weight in the silence, that pulling her hand away was reflex and not retreat. She doesn't fully believe herself until she's home, alone, staring at her ceiling, wondering why she can't stop thinking about the exact moment his hand went still under hers. The call from her landlord comes on a Tuesday, almost exactly a year after the debt notice that started all of this, and for a moment she thinks the universe is repeating itself as a joke. The building's been sold. The new owners are converting it to offices. She has 6 weeks. She doesn't call Lidong right away this time. She tells herself that's progress, that she can survive a crisis without reaching for him first, and spends 2 days searching listings that are either too far from the studio or too expensive to justify a loan. By the third night, exhausted and out of options, she gives in and tells him, mostly because he asks why she looks tired and she's too worn down to lie. "Stay with me," he says. Simple. Like it costs him nothing to offer, like it isn't the kind of sentence that rearranges a room. "That's not—" She stops. "That's a big thing to offer someone you're not even dating." "It's a big apartment," he says, and there's a flicker of something almost teasing in it, though his eyes stay careful, watching her reaction more closely than the joke lets on. "I have the space, you need somewhere. I'm not asking for anything in return." She wants to say no immediately, the way she said no to the debt cancellation, on principle. But principle feels harder to hold on to at 11 at night with 6 weeks on a countdown and nowhere to land. And before she's fully decided anything, she's saying yes, and he's telling her to bring whatever she needs whenever she's ready, and it feels, in the moment, like relief. She starts packing 2 days later. She gets through half a box of books before her hands go still over a photo of her old office, before opening it, actually, and she stands there in the middle of her half-empty apartment, tape gun forgotten on the counter, and asks herself a question she's been avoiding since the balcony. Am I doing this because I want to be near him, or because it's easier than being afraid alone? She doesn't have an answer that makes her comfortable. That's the problem. If this were about wanting him, she wouldn't need to ask. She'd just know, the way she seems to know everything else about her own life without needing to interrogate it first. She sets the box down on the floor instead of sealing it. She calls him that night, and when he answers, she doesn't ease into it. "I'm not moving in. I need to find my own place. Not because I don't—" She stops herself before she says something she isn't ready to say. I just need it to be mine. I need to know I chose it because I wanted to, not because I was scared. The silence on the line is long enough that she almost apologizes. Okay, he finally says, quiet, and she can't quite tell if it's disappointment or respect underneath it. Maybe both. I understand. She finds an apartment on her own 3 weeks later, smaller than she'd like, but hers in every way that matters, and Li Dong doesn't ask why she chose that particular building or offer to help pay for it, which she's grateful for, even though some quiet part of her almost wishes he would, just so she'd have something to refuse. He invites her to dinner the following week. Nothing unusual. They've had dozens of dinners by now, quiet ones in his apartment or the back corner of restaurants where no one bothers them. But something about the way he holds himself when she arrives tells her this one is different before he said a word. He's poured wine neither of them has touched. He's chosen his seat facing her instead of beside her. I need to say something, he says, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. She nods, and something in her chest already knows. I've spent my entire life making people afraid of me, he says, quiet, none of the command in his voice that fills every other room you walks into. Building something so solid that nothing could ever touch it, or me. I was good at it. I still am. He pauses, and for the first time since she's known him, he looks like a man choosing his footing carefully, unsure of the ground. You're the only person I've ever wanted to feel safe with me. Not obedient, not impressed. Safe. The silence after is the kind that has weight, the kind she can feel pressing against her ribs. Li Dong, let me finish, he says gently, and she does. I'm not asking you to feel the same thing tonight, or even to know if you ever will. I just needed you to know it wasn't nothing to me. None of it. Not the debt, not the calls, not tonight. She's quiet for a long moment, turning the wine glass she still hasn't touched, feeling the full weight of everything she's known and refused to look at directly finally arrive all at once. You're everything I need, Li Dong, she says, and watches something in his face open, unguarded, hopeful in a way she's never once seen him on. Then she makes herself finish it. But you're not the man my heart wants. He doesn't move, doesn't flinch, doesn't reach for the desk beside him, doesn't do any of the things she half expected. He just goes very still, absorbing it the way he absorbs everything, and she watches the hope she put there a moment ago fold quietly back into the composure he spent his whole life perfecting. I understand, he finally says, and his voice doesn't shake, though something underneath it clearly does. Neither of them says anything else for a long time. She sees him again 8 months later, on a street near the harbor she used to walk every morning before she left Seoul for a while, before she needed the distance to understand what she'd walked away from. He's still Li Dong, still the kind of presence that quiets a room without trying, but she notices it almost immediately, something softer sitting underneath the composure, something that wasn't there before. She watches him first from across the street. One of his men approaches him with a decision that needs making, something urgent by the look of it, and instead of taking it from the man's hands the way he always would have, Li Dong asks him what he thinks should be done, listens, nods, lets him decide. She's still standing there when he sees her. Neither of them moves for a moment. Then she crosses the street, because someone has to, and stops in front of him with all the things she's rehearsed saying falling away into something simpler. Did you ever stop loving me? She asks. He looks at her for a long moment, the city moving around them the way it always does, indifferent to what either of them is carrying. No, he says. She starts to apologize, and he shakes his head gently before she can finish. You don't need to. You taught me something I never understood before, that protecting someone was never the same as owning them. They don't get back together, but for the first time, both of them understand exactly why. A question for you. Can someone be the safest person in your life without ever being your soulmate? And if it happened to you, would you stay for the safety or leave for the truth? If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Silent Speaks Stories for more, and tell me in the comments, could you have made Naledi's choice, or would you have stayed? Silent Speaks Stories, where every story leaves a mark.